friendship matters, but if there's a professional perspective on that, it's build relationships and keep a hold of them. Spot the ones that you know you can bring into an internal huddle, because you'll find them. Some of them might be peers, some of them might be subordinates. So I would say look for opportunities that mean you're gaining a perspective from elsewhere. Immerse yourself in another perspective. So as a tech, I would have never had that perspective, but my God, it gave it me.
Today, we're joined by Finbarr Joy. Finbarr would describe himself as a career CTO and now an advisor to CTOs. You specifically have worked across companies like Superbet, William Hill, Netscape, Answer Digital, Answer Pay. You have led product organizations and teams, which has seen organizations contribute to revenue within that company. And you've worked across companies within the range of 600 million to 1.2 billion in revenue. And your leadership has contributed to hitting those figures. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Pleasure.
Let's dive in.
Thanks for having me.
No, Finbarr. So we were just chatting on the way up about your background and stuff. I don't know if from your perspective, when you left school, college, was it your ambition to be an NED at this point in your life? Was it a technology, I'm going to dominate this world, here we go?
Anybody from my school days now, you're working in IT. What happened to you? There'd be two fundamental shocks.
Yeah.
One would be, I used to have massive hair.
Okay.
It's all gone. Yeah. So there'd be the physical shock, what on earth happened to you? And then you're working in IT. So, when I was going to school, this is how long ago it was, the BBC Micro, the Acorn computer was the tool of choice, yeah? And unless you were brilliant at maths, you weren't allowed to do computing. And guess what? I wasn't brilliant at maths. So I didn't even touch a computer really until I was doing my degree. So, back in school days, a million miles away, but I was always a geek.
Right, okay.
I was always a dyed-in-the-wool geek.
What does that mean to you at that age? What does that look like?
I mean, we're looking at the kit around us here now. I've been admiring it. So, in my school years, I was typically taking things apart and putting them back together again. I've always been interested in music. So at first, radio, if I got a radio, if I got a CD player, if I got a record player, if I got a guitar amp, I would always take it apart and I'd have a bunch of wires hanging out of it.
Yeah.
And that was often commented upon by my friends, like, isn't this dangerous sitting here with this wire? So geekery has always been a part of it. That's the connection with now.
Were you successful at putting it back together? Because I like taking it apart. I just couldn't put it back
absolutely. I loved it.
There's always
really knowing what I was doing, trial and error.
Yeah. And that led you into, so how did you merge into the world?
It all came around purely from my degree.
Okay.
Yeah, so... I was always being interested in tech, but felt somewhat removed. It wasn't until I did my degree I got brave enough to step up and say, well, okay, let's have a go at this stuff. The degree I did wasn't a particularly technical one. The information studies, it was actually a BA.
Okay.
But there was a component of it which was attached to the School of Informatics at Beckett Park University, as it is now, Beckett University.
Yeah.
So that was about information retrieval systems.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, that just really sunk in. But bear in mind, this is the early 90s. So we weren't yet in the web age, the internet age, green screens, but it really took off. I somehow took a hold of this.
Yeah.
And it turned out I had a talent for it. So I actually delivered a technical project for my thesis.
Okay.
Which was very rare for that project. And that's how I got my honours. And that was very rare for that course. So I'd kind of gone all the way down the rabbit hole, if you like, down the technical path.
Yeah. But that was very much a passion.
Yeah, huge.
So how did that lead you into the world of work then?
A series of, a hugely pivotal, but in retrospect, lucky moments. So first job post-graduation was a company based in Sheffield called Fretwell Downing Software House. They deliver software for libraries, for universities, and it's all about information retrieval.
Okay.
The interesting thing is they happened to be connected to the internet in 1994, which was actually very rare.
I was going to say, that must, by that time,
because
not
they were
be
working with universities and libraries, etc., they had to be connected to, it's called Janet then, the backbone internet connection in the UK.
Okay.
And that was really rare. But that just meant I was kind of in boss seat when mid-1994, the first web browser came out.
Right.
And because our company's business was all about text retrieval, it very quickly connected to, oh my God, imagine what you could do with this thing. So, you sat with a graphical environment now. This is how long ago it was. This is how old I am. Everybody was used to Windows, or they were used to green screens. Okay. You're suddenly looking at this graphical environment where I remember it. There was a picture coming from the Smithsonian Museum.
Right.
In real time, and it's drawing across the screen like this. It takes 5 minutes to load, but you're watching it draw. And I remember it. it was gobsmacking. It was like, this is live from across the world.
Yeah.
Imagine what you could do. So that kind of just triggered, a whole sequence of. So because then there was only one technology company who was responsible for that at the time, which was Netscape. They were the first commercial entity in the web. Yeah. So because I was working with that at Fretwell Downing, when Netscape started up in the UK, I was in boss seat to get a job with them. So again, extraordinarily lucky position. You had to work with a company attached to the internet. You gain familiarity with the browser technology. That meant when Netscape started up in Europe, you got a shot. So, each decision subsequently has been based on, okay, where's the next interesting technical hop route? It was always typically something like that kind of gut reaction.
I suspect we're going to come to a number of the gut feels. How have you navigated since then? But is that what you would put it down to, that gut feel around this is where we're going, I need to pursue this? Netscape, so you moved over there. I'm assuming in terms of the organisation, it looked very different to what people thought of or remember it for now. But
give me if I burst into tears. Like everybody who was ex-Netscape does, but it was extraordinary. It was the model. It was the template that we're now seeing rampant throughout the valley, for good or bad, by the way. But it was the model. And there's so much of what Netscape created is still around us. JavaScript, HTTPS, these are fundamental technology building blocks we all still use today, created by Netscape. They were known, obviously, as a browser company. But actually, I worked in the consulting organization that was more about enterprise capability.
Okay.
So while they were famous for being the browser company, of course, every company in the world wanted to know how you get on board with this stuff. So what that meant for us in the UK, for me personally, meant I got involved in egg.com, UK's first internet bank.
Yeah.
I got involved in orange.net, so one of the first telco ISPs.
Right. Okay.
I got involved with HMSO, one of the government's first e-commerce initiatives.
Okay.
So you're in that first white heat of how do we do this capability. And it was phenomenal. And I will confess, I've spent my entire career since trying to recreate those 2 years tragically.
Interesting.
It's been a good marker. Yeah, it's been a good way marker in terms of find that flux again. Find that flux, because it's in that flux where you get the magic.
I'm interested to understand a little bit more with, you've been involved in a number of these things that sort of led from one to another. How would somebody else, have the same opportunity to just get involved with things like that? We are obviously now at the advent of, AI, and there's lots of these opportunities around. It seems like you must have at some point grabbed those opportunities where they presented to you. Could you just kind of give us a bit more insight?
That's a good point. Now, by the way, it's going to sound very trite, but I swear to God it's true. Now feels very similar to what it felt like in 1999. 1998, 1999 feels like now.
Right.
Where there's a lot frothing up, and you've got communities where some are saying it's all nonsense. Others are saying this is going to destroy mankind and it's going to change everything that we do. But there's uncertainty, there's naysayers. It's exactly the same. And what I would say is also exactly the same is the trajectory is entirely predictable.
Oh, right.
So that would be my first call out to people in terms of spot the trajectory, it's almost like gravity. You're not going to stop this.
Yeah.
Therefore, how can you get involved? And all I ever did was tinker. Yeah. I just tinkered. You grab it, let's grab a hold of this, see what it does. How can we use this? Going all the way back to Fretwell's, some great engineers there. As soon as this stuff was appearing, we put together a little demo. We can hook this up to the back-end system. And now our text retrieval system's working on the World Wide Web. Absolute hack in a clutch. You wouldn't do it now. But it meant you got familiar with it.
Yeah.
And that's all I would ever say. But get involved.
Right.
The availability has never been greater. The availability of this stuff is astonishing.
Wow.
So, within my career, if you'd have pinpointed or earmarked the kind of capability you can get now through DeepSeek, let alone, its predecessors, you would have been talking a multi-year project, hundreds of millions of, corporate dollars spent for what outcome?
Yeah.
Whereas now, DeepSeek a couple of weeks ago, it's now available on Azure.
Yeah.
Pence per minute. So there's nothing to stop you. Have a tinker.
Yeah.
And be curious, follow your curiosity.
I love that. And we'll get to kind of the future of AI and advice that you've got for other people a little bit later on. I guess where I was going with it is kind of what skills have been sort of the most critical in you? Curiosity sounds like one of them, but actually you would have had to have a bit of skills in order to make these opportunities tangible for yourself. So what skills have been the most critical in your career development and how did you cultivate them?
I mean, the key one in terms of always staying as close as you can to what is your passion. Therefore, I do genuinely believe that makes you more successful. So when I work with people now, some people do get themselves into an unfortunate kind of downward spiral.
Yeah.
And it's very clear that there's nothing they're working on is actually in their passion. And that's fundamentally why they're failing. So if you can keep that orientation as close as possible, I think you've got a better shot of pulling it off, because you're going to put more of yourself into it.
Yeah.
Now, for that to be true, you have to be good at influencing direction.
Okay.
So there's a bunch of things we can be doing, and especially corporate IT, God help us, 90% of them are not going to be very interesting. So, how do you find the interesting stuff? Make sure that's part of your direction. Therefore, you've got the platform to do the next interesting thing. So I'd say influencing is huge, and especially spanning boundaries. So in a corporate setting, 90% of what you want to get done is going to be done by people who are not under your control. So even if you're CTO, as I was, and you control the entirety of IT, you still are dependent on marketing, on product, on sales, on operations especially. And unless we can combine the effort, unless the win is clear for them, it's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to do that thing. So influencing, massively key. I'd say, where did I develop that? Probably in the white heat of, being involved in a startup. So, one of my early roles was, part of a member of the founding team at Answer Digital, a startup, and it was an organic startup, and to this day remains completely organic. They've never taken external investment.
Oh, wow.
But in those first few years, it's existential, everything you do. Yeah. So, my God, you have to be good at influencing. You are selling to the customer.
Yeah.
Please buy our thing. Yeah. This is what we can build for you. Yeah. So that became an existential need. I developed a muscle for that. Shout out to Gary and Kate at Answer Digital for mentoring me through that. Yeah. From geek to now you can sell was huge. But that subsequently has been a very big part of everything I've done with organizations. So, I kind of gained a capability for selling. When I became a corporate CTO internally, that was hugely valuable.
Yeah.
Influencing and, ultimately business development.
Yeah.
You're just doing it internally.
I guess the podcast has two audiences. I think what I'm going to ask you is a bit of context. There's particularly, so Post Answer, William, it's an enormous organisation. Yeah. So the two audiences we see is you have peers of people like yourself who want to pick up a segment on transformation or challenge or influencing, and then folks who are a little bit earlier in their career going, how the hell did Finbarr end up there? Right, so they're the two. Yeah. So taking Hills, because I think it's really interesting, the influencing piece. So it's an enormous organisation which is incredibly technology dependent. And you said 90% of your job is done by other people. Can you put context on what that looks like in terms of the size, complexity?
Yeah,
it'd be really interesting.
I think part of the whole influencing discussion is empathy as well.
Okay.
So, you've got to be empathetic to what people are trying to get done. The most formative role for that, for me, was actually a role I took on subsequent to Answer. So my first role after Answer was at BT Directories business.
Yeah.
Which doesn't even exist anymore. But the role was IT and operations.
Okay.
Well, what was great about that was, the IT biz, manage the IT team. Okay, well, I should be able to do that. But the and operations, which I probably hadn't paid enough attention to before getting hired, was manage a contact center. Right. So for this dyed-in-the-wool geek, that was straight out, you're way over your head in this territory. Literally 200-person contact center. I had to genuinely stretch.
Yeah.
Now, I will, shout out to the, credit BT in this. It's almost like doing an MBA, operating in the BT organization at any kind of seniority. So, yes, it's bureaucratic, and you'll see a lot of shade thrown on it for that. And it was ultimately why I left. But nonetheless, as a persistence, as a practice, it is a fact that they do move managers around all of the verticals and all the different types. If you're a manager, you're a manager, you're a manager.
Right.
So you should have the span to control it. You manage IT, you manage anything, So it's a great discipline, and it was fabulous. What it gained me, what it taught me, what I really had to pick up was empathy. So again, in most organizations, the contact center is usually quite down the low pecking order of the IT budget. Once everybody else has had their piece, sales, development, marketing. So it's almost cruel to give one person responsibility for both, because guess what? The people reporting to me are going to have needs. And then, come on, Mr. Who owns IT, you also, I had to develop that empathy to become, a good enough leader for that organization. So I would say look for opportunities that mean you're gaining perspective from elsewhere.
Yeah.
Immerse yourself in another perspective. So as a tech, I would have never had that perspective. But my God, it gave it me, and that is very significant to how you approach the influencing game, if you like. If you are understood to have empathy and understanding, of what it is like to walk a mile in their shoes.
Yeah.
They're going to listen to you a little bit more than maybe they did the last shiny CTO who came along with some great ideas. You could talk about their world and their challenges and what it's actually like to do this. The complexity was, that organisation had to move from being successful retail business, 80 years, 3,500 shops, across the high streets in the UK.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. Meanwhile, building an online capability while the world of online was coming up quick behind its shoulders. So, Hills was in the top, 3 or 5 in the world. Through that digital effort, it became number one. And that was all through transitioning from traditional corporate IT to you have to be good at product engineering now, which is a very, very different game.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the culture shift there?
Yeah.
Because there is going to be an enormous shift internally, realizing that you've got disruptors, the big folks hot on your heels, you're trying to lead from the front. There's going to be capability disparity. It's going to be a need to shift ways of working. So we're realizing the new norm. People in hugely opportunistic seats, people in very perceived disadvantaged seats, depending on their role. How do you begin to tackle that?
The culture thing is interesting, and I think it is key. It wasn't necessarily that I led it, but I got to witness what was a fabulous example of, what I've certainly returned to since.
Okay.
Which is until you give people an environment where they can experience the change, they're not going to change. So we see a lot of top-down driven efforts, which are about, this is the direction we're going in. We used to be that, now we're this. Head to that. And they'll put posters on the wall saying all these things, this is a new world. But they'll still, you'll typically hear execs saying how people are still not collaborating. Well, do they know the reason why they're not collaborating? And typically they don't, and that's why nothing's working. Well, a great example I saw at Hills, and I'll give you a shout out to the MD of the online business at the time, Andy Lee. He demonstrated basically shoulder to shoulder with tech. So I was often in meetings shoulder to shoulder with him. This is what we're doing. This is the direction we're heading in.
Okay.
And this is why. And then an open forum. So you could paint the big picture vision, but do you know what's standing in the way today? And it's typically a bunch of things around people's incentive schemes, around processes, around how the function is oriented.
Yeah.
Now, until you surface all of that, you're not going to get the change until the teams witness, that's what we actually do now. So you've got to give the teams some autonomy. You've got to give them some an environment in which they're allowed to explore this. But it's not until they've experienced that you're going to see a culture change. And that's certainly what we saw at Hills. And it was led through that kind of effort from the executive to walk the walk, give the teams the autonomy, find out what works.
Yeah.
There's some discretion involved in that. Inevitably you're going to fail a few times.
Yeah.
But you gain the commitment of the team, which ultimately gains you the momentum. So that's culture change.
But on the failure piece, are there things that stand out in your mind as either, wow, we got something wrong there, or wow, we learned something huge there? And how do you approach failure now, I guess, as an exec?
You try things, and it's whether you call it out quickly enough. Okay. And then whether the team has got the cohesion to fix that. So, one element I would say is a great team, and this is whether it's leadership or, the individual contributing teams themselves, but I'd say especially in leadership. Do you know how to, almost fall out, get everything out there and move on? So reflect on what really isn't working.
Yeah.
Can you as a team address that and fix that? Are you in the habit of doing that? So you see a lot of team development efforts, which are all about make sure everybody gets along and everybody agrees. I would disagree. I would say, is your team good enough to know how it can get blood on the walls, but walk out of that room in complete union? Is it in that habit where that's how well they know each other? That's how frank and honest and open they can be. If you think about the implications of that, they are significant. So getting that, again, that's a leadership sponsorship thing, that it's okay. And the leadership, we did take a lead. We got this wrong. This is something we got wrong. Put our hands up and we admit it. And in most corporates, that's not habit.
No.
And that sends a very strong signal to the team. It's like an object lesson. Yeah. It's okay now. They're, leading by example, test and learn.
Yeah.
Now, there's got to be a tolerance to this. You can't fail. But you demonstrating course correction, and through that, you're relying on good people. You're still hiring good people. You're trying to hire the best. And to be my experience, good people giving that example and that empowerment will typically get you through. But it needs that leadership, it needs that cohesion, especially in the executive, to see through what will look like very difficult times, not snap back the muscle memory of who do we blame for this failure. Yeah.
We've spoken obviously to a number of different people around failure, and how it's actually really important to live and breathe kind of the failures, it's okay to fail, but learn from it kind of culture and behavior. Do you remember a time, because I think all of us are, at some point we can probably pinpoint that time when we realized it's okay to fail. Can you pinpoint a time where in your career where you turned around and you thought, oh God, actually, I don't need to cover this up. Can you pinpoint that?
It probably does go all the way back again to, quite frankly, even as early as Netscape, it was like, we had no idea how this stuff came together. So, Ed.com said they're going to launch in 3 months. Really? Guess what? A lot of things went wrong before they went right again. Similarly at Answer, as a startup, you frequently try things which don't work.
Right.
So that almost became a developed muscle over the, best part of 10 years that I was there.
Yeah.
Which I guess made me somewhat braver, if not impervious, in those corporate environments. Mm-hmm. Where, to be fair, I don't think there's enough risk-taking going on anyway. It tends to be too risk averse. So the scale of it is obviously bigger, especially when you've got a good leadership around you. The ability to course correct, I think, gives you enough of a tolerance to see that through. So, along the way, you've got to still commit to, I would say, you bring in a discipline of committing to goals earlier than you might otherwise, yeah? So you get out of the habit of the annual, this is what we're going to do this year, and these are all the great big corporate objectives. You get out of the habit of that and into what's going to improve over the next quarter.
Yeah.
And you work like hell, you try some things.
Yeah.
The first few weeks it's not working, you course correct. Have you got enough time in the remaining 6 to 8 weeks to fix this? And meanwhile, you're doing what you can to build the bonds within the team.
Yeah.
When failures happen, there needs to be a level of resilience, and there's things you can do to give yourself that resilience. There's that perspective of zooming out.
Yeah.
Without sounding, again, glib, does it really matter? Is the sky actually falling in? No, it isn't.
Yes.
And if you're not in a good place, then maybe take that signal. As in, is this an organisation where you can fail? There's got to be part of your personal evaluation. And I appreciate people can be in that place, in which case resilience doesn't matter. You're in the wrong place.
Yeah.
So that in itself is something to act on, not continue to sacrifice yourself again to the next, corporate slug. So, read the signals, give yourself time for that reflection, zoom out, give yourself the benefit of that retrospective, if you like, and go again. So I would say the approaches are all around developing a resilience mechanism, but that's based on giving yourself time for reflection, and time for awareness of what's working and what isn't, and how you go again. But parallel to that, I'd say a key thing in terms of dealing with failure: have you got a network that you're checking in on? Are there people you can speak to?
Yeah.
Because you can get in a very dark place where you convince yourself it's all your fault, and this has happened again, and oh my God, here we are again. You need that external party to tell you, okay, here's a perspective, and it typically gives you another angle, which comforts you that, maybe it's not all down to me, but I would say work on that.
Yeah.
I do see individuals that don't have enough of a sanity checking going on, and they go all the way down that spiral.
How have you acquired those in your career?
It's a key part of how I work, in terms of teamwork. There are always relationships. I'm very glad to say, from each of those organisations, I've got very strong friends now in all of them. It's the friendship matters, but, if there's a professional perspective on that, it's build relationships and keep a hold of them. Spot the ones that you can bring into an internal huddle, because you'll find them as you work your way through. Some of them might be peers, some of them might be subordinates. Some of my best friends, some of the people I rely on for counsel today, were people that were previously subordinates to me, but my God, they're good. And I'll reach out to them, what do you think? Because they know what they're talking about. And it's priceless. But I do see it a lot now in terms of people who've got themselves into something of a downward spiral. And so one of the things they are missing is that external checks. But as you work your way through, hold on to those relationships, keep in touch, check in. How's it going?
Would you say you're a people person? Because earlier you sort of said you had to learn empathy. How much of it is kind of for the lack of a better word, God-given and how much of it is learned? Like,
Sure. I'm always brought, so when I get feedback, I'm always told that I'm very personable.
oh, right, yeah.
So I think a lot of the times, we don't know what's going on in IT, but Finbarr's nice. And we can speak to Finbarr, and he's a good egg,
Yeah.
and he'll make everything okay.
Yeah.
And it just happens to be, I'm personable.
Yeah.
And I am a huge people person.
Yeah.
And that's certainly how I approach development teams.
Yeah.
So too many technology organizations, the last people who are being consulted are the individual developers, God help us, who it turns out are the most powerful and purposeful and, in terms of the outcome, the most consequential in terms of outcome, people in your organization. But I see it time and again, they're getting missed off. So develop relationships with those people. And, they typically spot my passion and know that I'll represent them well. So, that aids you in terms of getting some commitment from the team. They can see me winning things for the team. But I'm described as personable, and it's always been a part of it, is the relationship management piece. And if I'm being trite, again, we'll see too often, it's almost like they see me as a buffer for the team.
Right.
But then, by the way, I spend all of my time dissolving that buffer. I genuinely see it as a responsibility of an IT leader to get rid of IT.
Interesting.
Oh.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Can you yeah.
So you should dissolve. So now, in the world we're in now, for me, and I guess off the back of it, now I'm no longer doing the operational CTO thing, so I could be a smart aleck. But I would say, but I did do elements of this when I was in situ. I would say now, and especially in this evolving world of AI, there is no earthly reason why you need this function called IT. As a technology leader, it's your responsibility to build technology capability in the company. So now everybody needs to be brilliant at technology.
Okay.
So why isn't the finance director hiring the best data scientists to work on our bottom line and find out where our gaps are? If he isn't, she isn't, should be.
Interesting.
And there's usually a number of reasons for that. So that's the job of IT. Well, that's wrong. And there might not have the capability for it. Okay, so how do we create that capability in finance? Why isn't our marketing director hiring great software engineers to build a brilliant customer engagement machine?
Yeah.
Because they think that's what IT should be doing. They think they should be buying a CRM. It's nonsense. Those best software engineers should be in that marketing department, should be attached to the customer. So you can put that across the organization. Product, especially. So organizations that rely on any kind of digital product, what on earth are those people doing attached to an entity called IT?
Yeah.
They should be attached to a commercial entity, which is fronted to the customer, and that's all they care about. So I genuinely see it as responsibility. So, bring me along as a buffer if you like, but you'll soon find yourself managing technology people in your team while I dissolve this thing you call IT.
8 years ago, there was this term digital literacy. How digitally literate are your organisation? I thought it was interesting because at that point, we're a big service desk and we were constantly getting calls. My password's expired. It wouldn't have been the cloud then, would it? If I can't get into my O365 account, digital literacy, can you reset a password? Can you turn it off and on again? Can we please reduce these tickets? Because we've got 20 people here and operationally we can trim it down to 10 if we have some. I think that's interesting, that taking digital literacy to today.
It's huge.
What is?
And we've got to go down a different rabbit hole.
Yeah, but it's
a huge bugbear of mine.
Yeah.
I do genuinely have that conversation, and I did when I was the CTO. I do genuinely think it's a huge issue. I think it's a massive issue for UK competitiveness. So, we are not digitally illiterate as a country. There's no way we are. So, as a benefit of the roles of Hull, especially at places like William Hill and Superbet, Eastern Europe knocks socks off us in terms of general percentage competency.
You're engaged out there, aren't you, at the minute?
Yeah.
I did a piece of work a couple of years ago because, finding it such a chronic problem in both, the organisers I work with in this region. Okay, let's have a look how many people are, leaving school in the Leeds region with technical GCSEs. It was less than 10%.
Right.
Whereas if you look in Eastern Europe, you'll find it's something like 60, 70% leaving with from school. And until we address that, it doesn't matter. We're way off pace.
I'm very interested in what you're saying. So what would you say is the role of the CTO or a CIO in that sense? Does that change their role?
So the CTO, I think it's always been solid, where it's about the commercial success through technology.
Mm-hmm.
So how does this organisation beat the competition through technical leverage?
Yeah.
I think that's always been very clear.
Yeah.
The CIO, unfortunately, has been a lot muddier.
Yeah.
So I've done the CIO role once.
Yeah.
And it comes in a couple of flavours. There's the flavour where there's already a CTO who's leading the commercial proposition, and they have a CIO managing the IT that the internal organization uses. It's all about the internal competency of the organization, and that's relatively straightforward. There's a bit more of an unfortunate pattern where we see a lot of, especially the corporates, who feel uncomfortable with technology, but they feel comfortable with the notion of a CIO. Quite frankly, often doesn't have a technology background, and that's one of the factors they're looking for, is how do we get to manage this awkward, hairy, nasty thing in the basement and make it more humane? We'll hire a CIO, or God help us, maybe a CDO, and that comforts us that we're going in the right direction. I think some of those are more problematic, and it's, forget the labels. If the role is involved with leading the technology competence for the organization, then all it should be focused on is how do we leverage technology to beat the competition, the strategic advantage.
Okay.
Not digitize, because you've got to do that anyway.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people doing that as the whole role and the whole transformation is based on that. Well, that won't get you anywhere. You've got to do that anyway. What are you doing that's leapfrogging the competition, that's going to, quite frankly, scare them? There's the technology leader's role to lead in that competency.
And you would do that by embedding technology experts within the actual team itself, rather than just sort of building a fiefdom under the banner of CTO,
So
CIO.
it's all about, doing that zoom out again.
Yeah.
Again, without disappearing down the rabbit hole. I'm a fierce proponent of Wardley mapping techniques.
Okay.
So, that's a way of getting commercial people and technical people in a room and agreeing a story about what do we need to understand, what's happening in our market, what does that mean for our value chain?
Yeah.
What are the competitive moves being made?
Yeah.
What is it that we're working on that's actually been commoditized? And are we admitting that?
Yeah.
Therefore, what are we grabbing hold of that's an advantage in the market?
Yeah.
So you've got to do that work through. But once you've done that work through, it's then about, okay, what's the leanest, most efficient means of organizing people to deliver on that? And you need a combination of commercial and technical competency hand in hand.
Yeah. Not
business asking thing of IT.
Yeah.
Business analyst goes away, creates spec, comes back, gives spec to not that whole pattern, but commercial people, technology people in sync and absolutely pushing for commercial objectives. One of the last things I did, technology people carrying commercial targets, commercial people carrying technology targets.
Yeah.
So have them share objectives to get that combined outcome.
Yeah.
In the portfolio that you're working across at the minute, in terms of looking at the future talent, and I'm sure we're going to go on to what advice would you give yourself previously, but just more broader, what are those organizations doing and either getting right or wrong to bring junior talent in, to put people into technology, to build awareness? Because I think you're totally right. We did some work with a company called Explore down in Wakefield around really trying to look at 11-year-olds through to 16-year-olds and having a way of they were fairly large of them, like BPs and BAE systems, and creating talent pools such that you're able to continually engage them over 5 years to pull them in. Yeah. And some of the stuff that they found, I don't know what the labour market is, but it was something around the amount of women that wanted to be beauticians was 7-8x the people that wanted to go into anything even related to computer science. Forget computer science, but anything even loosely related. But the principle that BP took was, well, we just want creative people. That's a UX person. You may want to draw on a face, you may want to draw on a screen, we don't really care, just come and draw for us. Yeah. Right? And once you start drawing, you make things look pretty, then we can start thinking about, okay, well, how do people engage with that screen? Okay, well, could you redesign? Yeah. It's creativity. I've gone off on a little bit there, but I think in terms of marrying the labour market aspirations to what's actually available and needed, we couldn't be further apart at the minute. But in your portfolio, do you see people getting stuff right and wrong?
Yeah, so the things to get right are, the two fundamental organisations I'm working with at the moment, so two very different approaches. So Superbet, an organisation growing at breakneck speed, so improving something like 30% year on year, which after 6 years gets to be very, very, very big numbers, yeah? They've approached it through a combination of hiring more surprisingly senior talent than you'd expect to be appearing in, for instance, an Eastern European betting company.
Yeah.
So the betting industry, quite sidebar, tends to be quite insular. So whenever you work with any betting operators, you'll find people are the other betting operators. And it's a little pool that moves around within each other. Superbet taking a very different approach. They're typically hiring very senior technology leaders from the Valley, for instance. Yeah,
right. Okay.
So, all the big names that you're used to. That's quite unusual for a betting company to do. But they've married that with bringing an awful lot of people through academies. So one of the biggest technical centres we've got is in Croatia.
Right.
And they've established an extraordinary discipline for mobilising these academies, bringing people through. And those people are very, very, they're up and running within 6 to 12 months, which is no time at all.
Wow.
Really, in terms of full contribution. So that's them doing it at scale. Interesting at Answer, we're reflecting the other week, something like the vast majority of the senior leadership team were all once upon a time members of Answer's Academy. And to get, to be clear, they take their academites directly as graduates.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the senior leadership team are ex-academites.
Interesting.
Which is extraordinary as a ratio. I've personally never seen that as a ratio in terms of this is internally developed talent. You've obviously got a clear competency there to internally develop talent. Where I've seen it go wrong is where there isn't that support given to the coaching and sustenance that is the reality of bringing people through. So people look for shortcuts. They'll maybe hire too many externals, and then it's too clear to everybody else internally there's no career growth here because they're just bringing people in from external. So, you've got to allow people that discretion to get that work done and the time and space for the true mentoring that it takes to build that level of capability. But I've certainly seen those two organisations have a fair stab at it. That's
Get it right.
Yeah. So if we just change tack slightly and talk about business transformation in general and just explore that topic there a little bit, what has sort of been the biggest change and transformation that you have undertaken in your career?
So it's bound to be hills, just in terms of scope and scale. Thousands of people, global organisation, the scale of development in the proposition, it was all there. So that was the big one. And and the fundamental takeaways were that alignment of it's probably the first and best example I saw of that alignment between executive and team. And if I see things going wrong in other organisations, it's typically because the executives run off into the distance and then frustrated with, these people are not good enough, let's replace them with people who are on plan, who are more up to speed. But the point is they've never actually done the homework to find out what's going on the ground. Or in a lot of IT departments especially, you get a lot of bottom-up driven efforts. We'll go agile even if the business won't. And, God help you, you just get into a god-awful state in that. So it's, keeping those two things in sync was what I witnessed at Hills. I'm not going to claim credit for it, but I certainly witnessed it. I played my part as, the person leading the technology development part of the organisation. It was great, as I say, to have the support of the executive at the time that was shoulder to shoulder.
Okay.
And that's typically what you see missing in a lot of other organisational contexts. I do see a lot of CIOs, CTOs walking the plank, going all the way out there, and when it goes wrong, they spot that there is no longer any plank. You traverse that walk entirely on your own. Who's at your shoulder? And if they're not, work on it.
Was it chap you mentioned, Andy?
Andy Lee,
Yeah. Was he already a proponent of tech? Got it?
Oh, huge, absolutely.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So that relationship.
That's something of a gift. I appreciate that's not always true.
Yeah.
But, I would ask people who are developing their careers, especially if you're on that CTO, CIO trajectory, make that part of your hunt.
Yes.
Yeah. So who's the personality you're going to attach to? So, Hills was a corporate, but I managed to find a bunch of characters who were up for it. Subsequently, I only worked for founders because there is something about that. Yeah.
Right.
So, the first founder I worked with, obviously I worked with the founder at Answer. I was part of a small team then. I'd never been part of a massive organisation that was created by that kind of founder, So the first example of that was Labara, Ratish Yoganathan, one of the UK's most successful entrepreneurs. He and his co-founders built that from literally nothing.
Oh, wow.
So day one, year 2001, whatever, they're driving around selling SIMs out of the back of a car to news agents. That became a global telco.
Is that where it started?
That's absolutely how they started.
I didn't.
You could buy a SIM. I remember it actually, and I was like, I don't know why you'd. And
it was monumental for us to meet. As soon as I met him, I knew I have to be in this organisation.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
and you won't mind me saying, he had a fierce reputation. But I found him entirely reasonable. And my God, he was passionate about technology. And he was one of the greatest, as I say, that at your shoulder moment. We got all the time with Ratish. It was very clear this was the direction he was heading in. And again, my advice to people developing their careers is, what character are you attached to? Make that part of your job hunt. Don't just say, brand X has got a great name, I'm going to work in that great brand X. Do you know who you're working with and who you're reporting to? Have you had a conversation with that individual? If you are at the C level, what's this CEO looking like for you? Are they going to walk the walk with you, or are they going to let you walk that plank? And similarly, it was the same with Sasha. He's now one of the, certainly one of Europe's most successful entrepreneurs. But, that founder profile is much more satisfying to work in than, guess what, corporate.
Yeah.
But the characters are everything. And I'd say that's got to be part of your evaluation.
Yeah.
What context are you letting yourself in for?
I couldn't agree. So I've worked for two people. I chose both the organisation based on the two people I met. Andy at Montage, small business, incredibly successful startup. So he was S3, youngest S3 director, Huxley Associates founded, exited, started Montage, 8 people in the room, just went, something about him.
There you go.
Something about him. Within 3 years, it was 80, 90
That context of transformation, so Andy, and we're giving him too many name calls. Was phenomenal at Hills. The whole team around him, by the way, and that executive in the online business, all walk the walk, and that made a huge difference. But it was extraordinarily hard yards. I often tell people, because everybody wants to know, how do you make this transformation stuff work?
Yeah.
So the Hills was successful. Yeah, they became number one in their marketplace. But by the way, the two most successful that I've seen are Labara and Superbet.
Okay.
And I don't think it's accidental. They were driven by the founder. And I think that's a huge call out.
Yeah.
If you got that founder behavior happening, if you haven't, it's unlikely the transformation is going to be significant. It's typically a founder who's quite willing to smash things apart. And whereas in a corporate, it's, can we make everybody win 10-0? They try and make everybody win 10-0, so nobody feels they're left out.
Yeah.
Especially at the executive level, rather than, do you know what? This isn't working. We no longer need this function anymore. We're going to recreate ourselves under a new shape.
Yeah.
It's typically founders are more adept and brave enough to take that step, which is true transformation.
Founder behavior.
Yeah.
Could you define that for us? Because I really like what you just said there. And I work with companies who have been acquired. Typically, they're much smaller, and we help to kind of scale them, right? So arguably, we go in, we have a startup culture, and then we go in and ruin it. Actually,
how do you transition?
How do you transition through that? So right. Founder behavior.
Yeah.
Can you give us some characteristics that you think?
The commitment is a key part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So key commitment, fierce empathy with the customer, the end customer.
Okay.
So what you see too often in corporate environments is it's all about the bottom line. It becomes an abstract entity.
Mm-hmm.
And all the thinking is about, how do we increase the bottom line? How do we increase the top line? Mm-hmm. And the customer is less and less part of the conversation. They'll do the obvious stuff in terms of the customer research. Exactly, we've got panels operating, but you don't see it being articulated by the exec. And I've spotted that with the most successful founders I've worked with. They are passionate advocates because they live and breathe the customer experience. Yeah, and that's all that matters to them. And they bring it to bear to the team. Yeah. So is somebody doing that? And I'm sorry, that person does need to be extraordinarily senior because it's got to be a point of focus. You can talk about encouraging everybody to take on that mindset. But you do need leadership because you're going to have to change a lot. So you need somebody to own and be accountable for that scale of change, and difference. Yeah. So we're not just passing off for doing a customer panel. Yeah. It's this person's going to bang the table until this thing is absolutely brilliant for the end customer. Because let's face it, 99% of most offerings are not. Yeah. You're tackling it. You're making it better for the end customer, or are you tweaking your bottom line again? And what the great digital leaders have taught us is, if you make it as surprisingly brilliant for the end customer as possible, guess what? That ends up in a huge win. Yeah. So you don't have to go over all those examples again. But by the way, it's surprising the number of organisations that haven't spotted that, and they're still dealing with the surface mechanics of key indicators for profit and margin, rather than the customer with the most astonishing offering the customer can get. So that is a key part of the founder mentality, and the commitment. So that commitment of committing to get it right for the right people. Yeah. So bringing people along with them, they put spectacular energy and effort into that. Alongside, they don't seem to need sleep, and I don't know how to do it.
They're just obsessed, I think. That's what it is.
Extraordinary,
obsessed with.
But there's just something about that level of bearing. And I appreciate it's difficult to isolate that and say, how can we apply that in a corporate setting? But I do urge people to look for the behaviour at least. Yeah. You might not be able to replicate it exactly, especially in a PLC. But are there significant enough entities at least pursuing those behaviours?
I think there's a couple of things that, as I'm hearing you talk, I'm starting to reflect on. One is, if you are, an employee within an organization that's going through a large scale transformation, or you are an individual looking for your place in this world and kind of developing your career, what I'm hearing you say is that you actually do have agency in terms of direction of your career, and picking the people who are going to, who you can learn from, who can help to develop you, etc. But then on the flip side, what I'm also hearing you say is, as a leader within that organization, responsible for that person's, you kind of have a responsibility to have these qualities that your team will emulate, and that actually the combination of the two will deliver a really successful transformation.
Do you know what's standing in the way of your teams today?
Yeah.
So, when there's always a transformation underway, it's typically the third or fourth or fifth we've tried in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Here we go again. Do you know, as a practitioner,
yeah,
what is blocking your teams? The whole execs complaining. The usual one is, we're not innovative enough and we're not collaborating enough.
Yeah.
That your team did not turn up to work today deciding not to collaborate.
Yeah.
They didn't.
Yeah.
The reason they're not is because they can't.
Yeah.
And have you seen the god-awful work that's been presented to them, possibly through, sequential Jira tickets popping up on the screen every 10 minutes? That's the reason you're not getting the best out of these people. So fix that. Until you fix that, you're not going to get their commitment. They're not going to fall behind you. Are the things you're talking about some great big blue sky, whiz-bang vision for the company? Do they associate that finally, this is when we fix this friction in my day-to-day life, because we've done the research. Our individuals understood what stands in, and this change is bringing those fixes. Therefore, I'm all for it. In fact, I'm ahead. I'm gonna lead it, and you will find that. So again, all of the organisations I work with, there was always at least one team that was 10 steps ahead, and for crying out loud, just needed to be unleashed. But up until now, we're just bashing their heads against a brick wall, and they are, your gift. They can make you look extraordinarily good. Okay, we'll let you run free. You'll do this. Look how fast and how good they're working. Why aren't we all doing this? There's always a team like that.
Can I just ask, communication? You're clearly a very good orator, and how you've described that makes absolute sense. Understand the challenges, unleash the potential of the great people. That's going to serve finance, procurement, all the other probably folks on the board that you sit around going, we don't have the right system. This is too slow. Why don't we have this? That fell over. It was offline for 5 minutes that cost us 10 million quid. Finbarr, that shit. Okay, how do you go about changing the mindset of those folks to give you the room to make those changes?
Sure. Reflecting on the recruitment conversation.
Yeah.
Do you have a CEO who's going to back you? For what are going to be some very difficult conversations?
Okay.
So, it always starts with fix our IT.
Yeah.
So I usually do have that conversation with that CEO saying, fix your IT. Well, do you realize, before I've even met your organization, I strongly suspect a large part of why it's not working is actually in the business, not in the IT team. So there will not to fixing IT. My God, there is. But the large part of the reason will be how you're set up as an organization. Are we willing to tackle that? And if you get the no, just fix IT, then obviously it's the wrong conversation.
Yeah.
But given that goes in the right direction, then the kinds of things you do, bearing in mind you've got the CEO's backing, you've been hired by the CEO. So you've got around a 3-month at least window or honeymoon opportunity where you're the CEO's man. Use it. Yeah. So early doors, have those conversations. This is what I've spotted. This is what's working. This is what's not working. Cast the shadow of the future. Yeah.
Okay.
What's likely to happen? And it's usually always the case in every industry. You can spot that digital competition that's either right at your shoulder, or even if it's in the distance, look at how quickly they moved. In other sectors, they will move that quickly here too. Paint those pictures, tell those stories, volunteer the truth about what you know isn't working in your part of the organization. So you gain credibility to, this person's not hiding anything. They're putting it all out there. But in volunteering that, you've got to grab as well. You've got to grab that. This is how we're going to move together as a team. You've got to take some leadership in that conversation. Yeah, we can do this. Why aren't we tackling this? And maybe it can be the fact that people are not used to hearing the CTO talk about, why isn't the product proposition stronger in this area? Why isn't our marketing stronger in that area? But the role has to step up to that for me. And it is part of that conversation. owning the influencing again, demonstrating empathy with the struggles of, poor Mr. Marketing Director that, still hasn't got the right CRM system. But, off the back of that, again, building that relationship. It does sound trite, but, gaining the commitment through understanding what are their true challenges, and showing true empathy for that rather than here's my new whiz-bang system that I think can fix all your problems.
And in those 90 days, because I think you're right. I remember in previous company, the boss, who I think Matt, had said, you've got about 3 to 6 months before you're no longer the new shiny penny. So if you're going to do it now. And to an extent, we did. How much of your time in those 90 days is spent with your team versus going out and sitting with the CPO by procurement, not product?
Yeah, it's definitely a risk, but the majority of time is external.
Wow. Okay.
So I work like hell on the second in commands.
Okay.
Yeah, as in they understand I've got their back.
Right.
Yeah. They understand the bunch of issues that have been historical up to now, which there always are going to get tackled.
Okay.
We are going to change some of these things. I will give them commitment about what's going to change. They have their opportunity to put their stamp on what do we need to fix around here. That's a key part of your learning. Yeah. They're going to accelerate your learning. So they know that I've got their back very, very quickly. And I give them some very early signals about, what kind of autonomy do we want to start making work around here. But then the vast majority of my time is getting under the skin of the business.
Right, okay.
And gaining that commitment and empathy and understanding with those characters.
Okay.
Yeah, and demonstrating it, being present in those places is huge.
And when you say you work quickly on your number 2, right? And the delegation of authority to them, so you free yourself up to go and do, the canvassing of the rest of the organization. So has your number 2, when you've gone in, always remained the number 2, or have you kind of made swaps in and out quickly? And
done that. Often been gifted with an extraordinarily good team in any event. Mm-hmm. So I will give a shout out to Labar. I'm going to name them all, but that team was phenomenal. So gifted team that was just for crying out loud. It was wonderful. Which meant I got to spend most of my time with Ratish. Because the team was so damn good. But that helped us overall. And you're not always in that place. And absolutely, you've got to build some of that capability, and you've got to give people their head. And I've had to do that. Some, William Hill at Superbet certainly. It's been more of a case of bringing people through, giving people that opportunity to take ownership where they might not have in the past, but absolutely giving them the opportunity. Because if they don't, then I can't do the things I need to do. And I will say I see a lot of that. So, root cause, you do the fishbone diagram. Mm-hmm. Why are you in trouble? Why is things not working? 9 times out of 10, they're not delegating enough. They're not delegating enough. People are not good enough. They're not doing anything about that. Because they've disappeared all the way down the rabbit hole of the broken thing rather than work on those team members, bring them through.
How quickly do you do that? And how do you spot talent that you want to bring through?
You've got to do it pretty much immediately. So, I do have, he says, hazily framework, but a way of evaluating, is this person a key contributor and are they good at what they do? As rapid as you can evaluation of that, because these are the people you need to quickly get into position to be able to manage things while you're spending your time maybe, getting around the execs, etc. So there's a, rationalization of that and an assessment of that. People who, outcome, where clearly their outcomes are significant. I'm blessed, with being usually attached to software development organizations. There are always engineers who stand out. And there's usually things that really, really are in their way. So, the role is quickly about how do you get things out of their way and give them as much entitlement as possible. And for that, thank the cloud, the acceleration that's given development teams has been extraordinary. But it's not always there to them. So that's been part of it. We far enough along that transition point. So, and people who take leadership, at that level especially, who you can trust to take the leadership. So, they've got commitment, they've got accountability, they've got clear accountability, they're transparent, no surprises. And you do what you can to get, there's typically a question of confidence. They don't necessarily have the confidence. So the competency is clear to see, but not necessarily being exposed. So then you've got to expose yourself, if you like, and be clear that you will back them. So if you falter, I'm there. Things might go wrong, but I'm there. We'll get you through it. But are you spending enough time on developing these individuals? And the number of CIOs, CTOs I meet who are having no one-on-one time at all with their team, and then they're wondering why. They have the quarterly review, in most cases 6-monthly review, too often annual review. There's not the weekly one-to-one, which means they're not on top of things, and that individual is not developing.
Yeah.
So, clear your diary. Get that individual on the front foot, because that means you've then got time.
Yeah.
Which you're currently telling me you have got no time because the business is too unfair, and it's all, the whole kind of victim thing sets in. Make the time to develop those people, because they're your route out.
In terms of talent and recruitment specifically, how quickly do you look to bring people in at the senior level? How quickly are you looking to change the shape, makeup?
It does depend on the context. Yeah.
Okay.
So at Finbarr, I needed to make no changes whatsoever. It was purely a case
even
of
scaling as it was.
Give this team their head. Yeah, they were superb.
Wow.
So I'll credit my predecessor in establishing that team, but I found an extraordinarily good leadership team. They really were. In other cases, then, if there's a clear gap, then you've got to hire it. You've got to make that call pretty quickly.
That's a leadership call. That's experience. My gut feel says this.
Yeah.
I'm going to.
There's a clear gap. And then how quickly can you plug that gap? And try and get as much as you possibly can, at least in terms of steer, diagnosed within those first 3 months. Even if you don't make the changes in those first 3 months, and they've been your finding out, but come out of that 3 months very clear with what you want to fix and what you want to address, and hopefully have candidates in mind.
The reason I ask, because I think at the moment there's an awful lot of change at the senior level, at the senior end of technology. And I think given the changes in April to rates, national insurance, there's going to be a stop. I think there's been a lot of movement. I say it's those folks who are in seat today going, right, okay, well, I've probably got my 60 whatever days left on the clock. It's that advice around, even if you've not made the call, right, we need someone leading data, we need someone leading supplier categories, whatever it may be. You'd signpost, that's going to be an area of focus.
Definitely.
May not have made the call, but just so everyone's clear, that's going to
be speaking to candidates. Yeah. Absolutely. Get the headhunters on the case.
Yeah.
This is the kind of characters we're looking for. Know that you've got people you can bring in.
Okay.
Especially at that senior level.
Yeah.
Know exactly who you're talking about.
Okay.
Don't get to the end of that and then begin a recruitment exercise that takes a subsequent 6 months.
Yeah.
Spot the gap and work on it, and you have candidates in mind. If it's clear that they're not going to be able to come from within.
Yeah. Looking further ahead, I thought it was really interesting. You said that at this point, we're seeing a real state of flux that you'd not seen probably since your time back at Netscape. If I start off right at the top, why?
How uncertain. Look, it's in the daily headlines. Mm-hmm. So this is probably the first time since then that technology has been in the front page.
Yes.
So it was back in the day. It now is every day. Look what happened in the last 2 weeks over hysteria over DeepSeek.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. And you've also got this, some of the headlines are about, is it going to change our daily lives as an individual citizen? Is it going to do us all out of work?
Yeah.
Is it going to see the end of humanity?
Yeah.
Terminator happens. And then you've got the equally loud, it's nothing, it's nonsense, it's fluff, it's all it's all hype. Now the truth might be somewhere in between those two. I fundamentally believe, look at the traction, just look at the pace and scale, and you can't tell me it's not going to be consequential. Of course it's going to be consequential, but don't treat it as something you can tinker with and maybe it's just another part of that. It's not. This is as fundamental as 1998. We're back in 1998. Yeah. The wheels are in motion. This machine is coming. Are you plugged in? Are you prepared? What's going to be your play? Don't pretend that it's something you can just ignore for now. And we'll zoom all the way back into 2002. The early days in Answer Digital, we were in the business of selling this new web thing, and of course, you come across the big retail organizations in the UK, and you use Amazon as an example.
Yeah.
And of course, back then, everybody laughed at them. And I remember those conversations with brands that 3 years ago came together as one to petition the UK government to stop this unfair Amazon thing. Because it's unfair. Legislate. They're not operating on the same basis that we are. It's not unfair. They took advantage of 20 years of development that you turned down the opportunity to do.
Yeah.
You can't now turn around and say it's unfair. You could have built the same capability. You decided not to.
Yeah.
And yes, a lot of those retail brands have expired now. But it's very interesting. There are organizations now taking the same stance with the AI stuff. Saying, it's all a bit fluff. It really isn't. It's like, if you think this is not going to touch your organization, then you are similarly going to find yourself in that existential threat down the line. So I think we're in exactly the same position. But I think the outcome will be very different. I think we will see.
What do you think
the dissolution of this thing you call IT.
So what do you think are the opportunities in front of us at the moment?
Huge, as you could probably tell by my demeanour. I think it's huge. So this stuff, for most of my career you could only dream of. And now it's literally a cloud call away for a few pence.
Yeah.
Good grief. So what would you not point it at?
Yeah.
So think of any part of your organization which is struggling with, things should be a lot faster than this. You've now got an automation machine at your fingertips. So, there's some commentary on it. I think it's a very strong signal. Did you see the call out that Klarna made recently? So they've done away with all of their big IT platforms. So Salesforce,
Right.
The big people management platform, etc. They've done away with all of them, the SaaS platforms, and now building their own agent-driven AI systems to glue together everything because it's really, really straightforward.
Yeah.
So that corporate workflow that you previously relied on this great big SaaS behemoth to manage for you, that takes 5 years to implement, takes 10 years to pay back, and takes you through a world of pain in the meanwhile, being replaced by, we can glue together the workflow in this stuff very, very quickly. We can feed it all of our corporate knowledge and it can absorb it and it can now play that back to us.
Yeah.
That as a machine is extraordinary. So, I think you're going to see that. It's got this glib, god-awful term, agentic. So agentic AI, I think, is going to be significant.
Yeah.
And I think you will see it dissipate the SaaS platforms over time. Maybe not immediately, but over time. It's a thing to explore. Look at some of the big, meaty stuff that's been on your backlog for too long, too expensive to consider. Throw people at the cloud and have a go using DeepSeek today. You'd probably surprise yourself.
So a few things together that you said around the founders putting the customer at the heart of the journey. So we were at an event on Thursday night where within 90 minutes, an application was built in an agent in AI.
Yeah.
And it was a room, 100 or so people, call 80% of them software engineers. Broad consensus would it would take between 2 and 4 weeks to engineer. And I'd like to think we invite some of the best engineers in Leeds to that. And so these were not junior folks doing a computer science degree going, this might take 6 months. It's one of the brightest engineers, I would say, in the country going, that would take just 2 to 4 weeks, depending on its serviceability and application. The only thing that was wrong with it was that the logo was probably about half an inch. So that would probably take about 2 or 3 minutes with some more prompts, but it was an event that we were at. And that was the only thing that was wrong with it. It had 10 questions. It gave you information around your BMI or health status. They were able to program it to then do recommendations. They were able to drag it was a little bit pre-engineered, but some coding standards. It was able to do documentation reviews. It was in real time. To go to your point around putting the customer or internal customers at the heart of the business, you could build that with them on a Teams call within a morning.
Exactly.
Is that what the future of your company is going to look like?
I think so. And bear in mind, these are only the first versions.
This was sort of their point.
Yeah.
This was not.
But look how quickly the capability is appearing. That's the point. Zoom out.
Yeah.
Look at the trajectory. This is astonishing. So, of course, you could pull that apart now. You could say, but this is wrong. Yes, but come on. This stuff wasn't even with us just over a year ago.
Yeah.
Look what you can do now. That trajectory, the pace is clear. Yeah. So the momentum is clear. So within 3 to 5 years, we'll be way beyond again. And this is, again, a reflection on what we saw in the late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah. A lot of people threw, shade at this nonsense. None of them are profitable. They're all burning cash. And then within 10 years, they're complaining to the government, do something about them. They're unfair. We're exactly the same place. So now it's problematic. You can pull holes in this stuff.
Yeah.
But look at the trajectory. I think within, a few short years, it absolutely will be how tech gets done. I don't think it'll necessarily displace that many. I don't fundamentally believe it will replace software engineers.
Okay.
But I think it'll take away a lot of the pain, a lot of the graft, and it should make it, a lot more straightforward.
I think what's really clear, at least to me, is that we are at that point, I guess, in that let's categorize it as a transformation curve.
Yeah.
Right. So we're sort of, we're going through this transformation through the discovery phase of what this could mean for us as a society, right?
That's right.
And at the moment we can see efficiencies that it can give us. I don't think anybody who understands AI would sit there and say, okay, this is going to replace me. It might replace menial tasks, but actually you still need the human creativity. Yeah. You still need, the creativity that comes with being a human in order to, give them instructions, but it could actually make your work a lot more efficient. But as we're moving kind of through that change curve, where do you think the opportunities for individuals, people to future-proof their careers, to
Sure.
accelerate their careers? Where do you think that's going to come from?
I would say, stop fighting the beast and,
Yeah.
grab a hold of it. So you see a lot of people in denial, someone's like, la, 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 la,
Yeah.
but I'd say, grab a hold of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, reflect on what it means for you in your role.
Yeah.
So, I don't think it's accidental again. And, let's face it, VCs don't get it right all the time. But Y Combinator revealed this is what we're investing in over the next year a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And most of that list is commoditizing and automating senior white collar roles. So lawyer, diagnoses, medical diagnoses, accounting, marketing. So if you're a senior professional in any of those things, do it to yourself. Be the best practitioner.
Yeah.
Lead the way in how this can automate your role, because that will make you very, very precious.
Yeah.
Don't be a subsequent victim of it.
Yes.
Yeah. So spot the trajectory, grab a hold of it, be the best proponent, be the leader of this capability within our function.
Yeah.
Demonstrate what you can do. For crying out loud, don't be in denial and you don't have to learn to be a software engineer even these days.
No.
And I think that's one of the most powerful aspects. If you are in tech, then absolutely grab a hold of it and lead the way in what difference it can make to optimizing your current function. So lots of developers are using Copilot anyway. But in lots of the other roles, especially in IT ops, grab a hold of the toolkit, start building examples of what it could do. Be that person who leads the example.
Yeah. I think
rather than has it happen to you.
Yeah. I think what you were saying earlier around kind of increasing technology literacy, this is kind of basically what you're saying is do it to yourself, go and get educated in some of this stuff and increase your own literacy in some of this AI.
And it's never been easier.
Yeah.
It's never been easier. You come across stunning examples of, because of everything that's online now, so people are entirely self-taught. From completely different domains, getting into software engineering. Yeah, because you can learn it all online now. You really can, if you're driven enough, to do it. But even in a regular profession, practice or function, become that bit more technical. Pick up these toolkits, and I think lots of people are anyway. It may be that your particular corporate doesn't allow you access to ChatGPT, but nonetheless, spend what time you can grabbing a hold of it. At least the Microsoft Copilot environment.
In the businesses in your portfolio, how are the businesses adopting AI well, or how are they adopting innovation? Maybe slightly broader question.
I mean, so first of all, you've always got to have time and space for innovation. Okay. And you've got to have commitment to bring the innovation through. So, you can have a billion bright stars flashing, but if none of it ever makes it into the real world, you've got nothing. And you do see a lot of that. You see the innovation theatre, look at these amazing things we've got here, but how many of them are live? Not because it's a threat to the core business. Yeah. So I'd say as well as establishing the competency, which you've got to create headroom for, work on the go-to-market. And gain the commitment of the organisation and the whole business to go to market. Okay. That yes, this is going to replace some of our existing proposition, and we are going to do this. So that needs to be a key part of making innovation happening. In terms of particular innovations, things like AI, for instance. So while you hear me be a very enthusiastic proponent and evangelist for this, I also reflect on, if I'm sat working in especially a regular corporate environment with data scientists, they'll already be way ahead of this stuff. Yeah. So again, it's how can we isolate some of that effort to own this capability for the organization? Because they're the best people to do it. They typically already know anyway. They're just not being enabled or allowed to do it. They already have a lot of the capability that you're expecting. Yeah. It's, we get lost in all of these terms, but there are core practices under the hood, combination of software engineering and statistics, good old fashioned statistics. And depending on which world you've come from, makes you a lead practitioner at either. But there's lots of people in the org will typically have that capability anyway. Have they been entitled, have they been empowered to pick this stuff up? For crying out loud, don't lunge for one of the big five to come and tell you how this is done. Highly likely your people already know. You just not let them do it, or at least have the core capability and skills. Yeah. Give them the wherewithal, set them up in an environment. You will have people already doing machine learning and data science. They're practically there. Just let them play with this stuff.
I mean, it's just been an incredibly interesting chat, really, hasn't it? I think.
Too kind.
No, I
thank you.
There's stuff that landed with. You phrased it slightly differently. You were fortunate enough to pick a founder. I'd just say pick a boss.
Yeah,
pick that boss. Particularly early on.
Spot on.
But early on, yes, you've got to want to work at the company, and then there is some stuff, I don't want to say just pick that person and everyone's going to make their own choice, but pick that person.
Absolutely.
Because that person for 3-5 years, I think compounds 20-fold 10 years further down the line. Empathy for me is massive. I think if you are fortunate to have it as sort of one of your innate characteristics, brilliant. If you're not, go out and pick up a book, listen to a podcast, or just go and, you were very clearly a people person. Go and chat to a couple of people. You'll soon learn it. It's not that, if you can go and listen to someone's personal story, and over time you'll pick up a few as you go through your career, you'll pick that up, and some people will index a bit higher, a bit lower. But if you, I would say the extent of that is if you're a bit vulnerable as well. I know that I'm 80% here, but I'm 50% here. People forgive the 40 if you're vulnerable. I loved the scale of impact and excitement that you clearly have, because I think we are in the process of speaking to lots of technology leaders, and I think the excitement that you still clearly hold for
huge.
For today,
I'd be doing this whether I'm being paid for it or not. I don't think that all the time. But I'm doing it anyway.
I love that. I love that. And I think that that's part of it, isn't it? Because we've had everything from we're going to become the HR department for the bots through to don't worry about it. In all truth, it'll be fine. I'm kind of holding my counts on where I fall, but I think your particular embrace it is absolutely me. I don't think anyone would be surprised by that, but definitely embrace it. But also it's not isolated to the solo owned, innovative, agile. Some of the biggest PLCs in the country have got you in your board, got you in their boardroom. I think that kind of advocacy is brilliant. I'd love to do this again in a year, because I think at the pace of change we're going at,
you were wrong.
Bang on.
You were absolutely wrong. This is how badly you called it. Now let's walk through that.
Let's talk about this, David. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. Brilliant conversation.